We are taught to fear the invisible, bacteria, viruses, the microscopic assassins that cull civilizations in silence. But in the true history of 1347, the threat was not microscopic, and it was certainly not of this earth. We look back at the Black Death as a tragedy of sanitation rats, fleas, and medieval filth breeding a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. We comfort ourselves with the idea that it was a natural disaster, a random roll of the biological dice. We are wrong. The Great Mortality was not a disease. It was a harvest. The year is 1347. Europe is already a graveyard waiting to be filled. The Little Ice Age has begun. Crops are failing, and famine has weakened the population from London to Rome. The Church holds absolute power, preaching that suffering is a test from God. But far to the east, on the steppes of Central Asia, something has fallen from the sky. The Mongols speak of a black star that crashed into the earth near Lake Sicily rock that didn't cool down, but cracked open like an egg. The infection vector reaches the west through the siege of Caffa, a Genoese trade port on the Crimean Peninsula. The Mongol Golden Horde, led by Yoni Beg, is besieging the city. History tells us the Mongols started dying of the plague and catapulted their own dead over the walls to infect the Christians. This is partially true. They did catapult the bodies, but the corpses were not stiff. They were writhing inside the walls of Caffa. The Genoese merchants watch with horror as the bodies land in the streets. They expect the smell of rot. Instead, they smell something sweet, like ozone and burning copper. When the city doctors examine the dead Mongols, they find the famous buboes, the black swellings in the armpits and groin. But when a surgeon takes a knife to lance one of these boils, pus does not come out. What emerges is a black, chitinous fluid, and something that scuttles, panic erupts. The merchants do not understand that they are witnessing the first stage of a biological terraforming event. They do what rats do when the ship sinks, they run. 12 Genoese galleys flee the port of Caffa, setting sail for Sicily. They believe they are escaping the siege. In reality, they are the delivery system. Under the decks, in the dark dampness of the hold, the crew begins to cough. But they aren't coughing up blood, they are coughing up spores. The ships drift toward Messina, carrying a cargo that will turn the medieval world into a nesting ground. -1, 1347. The 12 Genoese galleys drift into the harbour of Messina, Sicily. There is no one steering. The sails are tattered, flapping idly in the breeze. The silence from the decks is heavy, broken only by the creaking of wood and the lapping of waves. When the Sicilian harbour masters board the lead ship to collect the docking fees, they are met with a sight that defies theological explanation. The crew is not dead, they are fused to the wood. The sailors have been transformed into biological hives. The black swellings, the buboes, have grown to the size of grapefruits, pulsing with a rhythmic, wet thrumming. The harbour masters retreat, screaming, but they have already inhaled the air of the hold. The infection vector in this timeline is not just contact. It is airborne spores released by the ripe hosts. By evening, the first cases appear in the city of Messina. The medieval understanding of medicine is based on the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The physicians of Sicily attempt to treat this pestilence by bloodletting, believing the patients have an excess of hot blood. This is a fatal error. When the veins are opened, the pressure inside the body is released. The parasites, sensing the drop in pressure and the presence of oxygen, erupt. The horror is visceral. Families watching over their sick loved ones see the patient's chests burst open. It is not a microscopic death, it is macroscopic predation. Black, multi-legged organisms, no larger than a thumb, but moving with terrifying speed, scuttle out of the open wounds and into the shadows of the bedchambers. They seek new hosts immediately, burrowing into ears and nostrils of the screaming mourners. The church declares it a punishment from God. They organize massive processions, parading relics of saints through the narrow, crowded streets to ward off the miasma. In reality, they are creating a buffet. The close proximity of the crowds allows the parasite, which operates with a singular, insectoid hive mind, to jump from host to host with exponential efficiency. Within a week, Messina is quiet, not because everyone has fled, but because the human vocal cords of the population have been consumed to make room for the nesting sacs. The plague doctors arrive, wearing their iconic beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs to filter the bad air. In our history, these masks were primitive gas masks. In this timeline, the beak is a dinner bell. The organisms are attracted to the scent of the herbs. They swarm the doctors, crawling up the leather cloaks, finding the gaps in the stitching. The beaks of the masks are ripped off. The healers become the first casualties of the new ecosystem. Sicily is lost. The hive looks north, toward the mainland. By the spring of 1348, the concept of a quarantine is laughable. The infection does not respect borders, and it certainly does not respect the feudal laws of men. The entity now operating as a unified, continental super-organism moves north into Italy, France, and Spain. It is no longer relying on ships. The infected hosts, driven by a parasite that hijacks the motor functions of the brain, begin to march. These are not the slow, shambling zombies of modern fiction. These are sprinting incubators. They run until their muscles tear and their feet bleed, driven by a singular biological imperative to reach population centers before they burst. When they reach a walled city like Florence or Siena, they do not besiege it. They simply pile up against the gates, a mountain of writhing flesh, until the pressure breaches the timber, or the creatures inside them claw their way over the stone battlements. The military response of medieval Europe is tragic in its futility. The King of France, Philip VI, calls his banners, the flower of French chivalry, out to meet the threats in the fields of Picardy. Thousands of knights in heavy plate armor, the tanks of the 14th century, lower their lances and charge the approaching horde. It is a suicide run. The impact is sickening. The lances skewer the bodies of the infected, but this only aids the enemy. The impact ruptures the ripe hosts, releasing clouds of black spores and thousands of the scuttling parasites directly into the faces of the horses. The horses panic, throwing their riders. Once a knight is on the ground, he is doomed. The heavy plate armor that was designed to stop swords becomes a sealed sarcophagus. The parasites find the gaps in the visors and the armpits. They crawl inside the steel shells. The screaming of men trapped inside their own armor, being eaten alive while unable to scratch or escape, echoes across the battlefield. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI sits on his throne, surrounded by a ring of huge bonfires. His physicians have told him that fire purifies the air. For a time, it works. The insectoid creatures recoil from the heat. But the smoke of the fires obscures the sky, turning day into twilight. The creatures adapt. They begin to use the sewers and the catacombs beneath the papal palace. The Pope is not killed by the plague. He's dragged down into the darkness of the cellar by his own Swiss guard, whose eyes have turned entirely black. The flagellants, religious fanatics who travel from town to town, whipping themselves to appease God, become the ultimate super spreaders. The scent of their fresh blood draws the swarm for miles. They walk from Germany to England, thinking they are bringing salvation. Instead, they are leading a trail of monsters right to the gates of London. By Christmas of 1348, there are no nations left in Europe. There are only feeding grounds. By 1351, the Great Mortality has ceased to be a medical event and has become a geological one. The entity has finished consuming the biomass of the population and has begun its secondary phase, terraforming. Travelers looking at the horizon in France or Germany do not see forests of oak and pine. They see towering, spiraling structures made of bone and secreted resin, rising hundreds of feet into the air. These are the hives. They pump a thick, yellow spore cloud into the atmosphere, choking out the sun and lowering the global temperature. The last bastions of humanity retreat to the edges of the continent. In Scandinavia, the kings of Norway and Sweden burn their own bridges and seal the mountain passes, hoping the cold will stop the swarm. It does not. The parasites adapt, growing white fur-like filaments to survive the frost. They burrow under the snow, attacking the isolated villages from below. There is no glorious last stand. There is only silence falling over the north, house by house. In England, the infection jumps the channel not on ships, but on the wind. The spores drift across the Strait of Dover like a fog. The peasantry of Kent are the first to change, but the horror reaches its peak in London. King Edward III retreats to the Tower of London, barring the heavy iron gates. For weeks, the Royal Guard listens to the scratching on the stone walls outside. The City of London is being digested. The wooden houses are broken down by the swarm to build incubation chambers. Finally, the creatures breach the White Tower. They do not enter through the doors. They come up through the latrines and the well. The king is not killed. In this timeline, the royalty are preserved as high-value hosts. The hive mind recognizes the hierarchy of its prey. Edward is encased in a translucent chrysalis in the throne room, kept alive in a state of paralysis. His royal blood used to nourish the first queen, caste produced on earth. The crown of England remains on his head, but his eyes are gone, replaced by the multifaceted clusters of the insectoid conquerors. Europe is dead. The nest is born. 600 years have passed since the Black Star fell. If you look at a satellite map of Earth in 2025, the shapes of the continents are the same, but the colors are wrong. The Americas, Africa, and Asia are glowing with the electric lights of a hyper-militarized human civilization, but Europe is a dark void. From the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the Ural Mountains in Russia, the continent is known as the exclusion zone. It is a vast, alien jungle of black chitinous towers and yellow fog. No human has set foot in Paris, Rome, or Berlin for centuries. The borders are guarded by the Global Defense Coalition, a perimeter of automated railguns and flamethrower drones that burn anything trying to cross out of the zone. Humanity survived by abandoning its cradle. The Islamic caliphates and the Chinese empires of the 14th century managed to construct massive firewalls, literal trenches of oil, and pitch to halt the spread east and south. The discovery of the Americas happened earlier, not out of exploration, but out of desperation to find a safe haven. Modern science has studied the European organism from a distance. We know now that the Black Death was a terraforming seed sent by a cosmic intelligence. It failed to take the whole planet because we burned it back, but it succeeded in claiming a beachhead. Occasionally, the smog over Europe clears and satellites capture images of the entity. It covers the entire surface of the continent, a single pulsing superorganism the size of a tectonic plate. And in the center, where the meteor hit in 1347, something massive is growing. A spore cannon, aiming back at the stars, ready to launch the next seed to a new world. We didn't defeat the plague. We just learned to live next door to the monsters. This has been Chronos Mortis. The archives contain realities where we are the masters, and realities where we are merely the soil. Which file should be opened next? The nuclear gods of 1945, or the vampires of Rome? To keep your biological distinctiveness, subscribe and ring the bell. The spores are drifting west. Transmission end.